I wanted to acknowledge that the McMaster University stands on the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Wampum belts are beads bound onto strings, which narrate the Haudenosaunee history, tradition, and laws. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum was created to bind the nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy to the Great Law of Peace. The dish represents the shared land, while one spoon reinforces the idea of sharing peace. With that being said, I just wanted to take a moment to thank Dr. Ryan for reaching out all those years ago to the Department of Health, Aging, and Society and asking if we might be interested in partnering in such a project. And with the help of our experiential education coordinator, Ruth Ann Talbot, this intergenerational opportunity was created. So thank you, Ellen, for that creative insight and wisdom to bring so many people together in such a wonderful way. Our students are also so appreciative of their experience with their senior partners' memoir writing. I want to thank, in particular, Isabella, who helped organize today's event. Thank you, Isabella, because I know that volunteering to do this was something added to your plate, and it's the end of term and there's so much on the plate at present. So to begin today's presentation, I want to first, and I was asked to read the ordered list of presenters, the entitled work, and the student partner who helped. So you can follow along as Isabella puts up the document. So first we'll have Eunice Porritt. My disclosure is what she will read to us, and her partner was Thurlear Silva Baskin. Then we have Penny Salvatore, Ellicottville Memories, Catherine Elber's partner, Henry Schwartz, Autobiography Project, partner Sheila Rodney. Then we have Robert Murrow, Becoming a Teacher, and his partner was Isabella, Isabella that's here today. Gordon Cameron, The Dirty 30s, partner Alyssa Seville. Owen Fitzgerald, Books on Our Family History, My Personal Pandemic Project, partner Jenna Wheeler. Carol Cartier, My Letter of Gratitude, and Maya Perrier was her partner. Mary Lou McCrae, Paternal Ancestors, Maya Wilhelm, Jim Tim, First Day, Brittany McLean, partner, and Sue Aylesworth, My Memory Quilt, and partner Allison Hansen. So with that having been said, we'll ask Eunice if she'll begin. Are you there, Eunice?
Eunice, I think we just need to unmute your mic. It just should be in the bottom corner to your left, I believe.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we're all good.
Okay. I'm ready to go. Okay. The writing of my memoirs was a disclosure. To Ellen, Ryan, Geraldine Vos, and all their staff, thank you for allowing me to write my memoirs, a project I will always remember. A memoir that I would never have written if it wasn't for my super student and helper, Thurler Sebastian, who not only edited my writings, but opened my eyes. I apologize for not having photos for this presentation. Writing my memoirs was written as a narrative for my 6 grandchildren, all of whom are now in their 20s and residing in France, England, and Spain. As my friends often say, excuse me, my life is not only a book, but a movie or a TV series, just like most people's lives, of happiness, heartache, and trauma. My two children, the Junior League and the creation of Hess Village, took up most of my life. Then a divorce from a lawyer and politician forced me back into the workplace at middle age in order to care for my two children, because back then there wasn't alimony or support payments. Fortunately, in the early 70s, I became the director of Mohawk College, often the only female in a man's world, in a technological college, which at times was mostly male students. As a result, I took on social justice issues and became extensively involved in the Hamilton-Burlington community. Excuse me. Participating on several boards, such as the hospitals, the art gallery, Chamber of Commerce, Hillfield Strathallan College, to name a few. Since my CV was quite extensive, Thurla helped me to select 5 issues within my life story, ones which had historical timeframes. Number 1 was the Depression. Number 2, World War II. Number 3, my bout with cancer 30 years ago. Number 4, COVID on January 2021, when there were only 5 people in the ward at the Joseph Brant Hospital, and presently my life in a retirement home. I soon learned that these topics were quite negative. Each week I would write my thoughts, and every Thursday night we would have a Zoom meeting. I really look forward to this, and we would discuss what the items were that I had written. Thurla challenged me often, and of course my nature, I challenged her too. Thurla was smart, phenomenal, and caring. These conversations opened up my whole life. She got me to talk about my feelings. Everything was so private. Our parents did not discuss much with us, or did we ever question their authority. We accepted. With Thurla's help, my memoirs became a disclosure to me as a person. I had learned that I'd hidden so many things within myself. What an eye-opener to me. It was a mental health insight at the age of 91, and so helpful and revealing. Writing my memoirs took on another whole meaning to me. I have to thank my husband, Paul, my many fantastic friends and colleagues for their support, as well as my own religious faith, and I have made it this far. To Thurla, thank you. You are amazing. I will never forget what you have done for me. God bless. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you, Eunice. I'll have to pass on your kind words to the Thurla. I know she really appreciated working with you as well, and gained as much from you as you did from her.
Thank you.
Next, we have Penny.
My name is Penny Salvatore, and I come to you via video today because I'm not able to join you. Anyway, what I would like to do today is tell you a little bit about the project, as part of the Intergenerational Project at McMaster that I did. I ended up with a book, and I'll tell you all about that and the role my student played in helping me put this together and so on. So I think I'll just start telling you about the project itself. I had been wanting to write this story for a long time, but never quite committed pen to paper, and I thought this might be an opportunity to do so. It is called Ellicottville Memories, Forever Thankful, 1981 to 2006. That's 25 years, a long time. Salvatore's, O'Neill's, and DeFrancesco's. The story is about 3 families, obviously, and over a 25 period. in Ellicottville, New York, which is just south of Buffalo, and it's a ski area. And that's why we were there. We ended up purchasing a house, this house, a big house. Certainly not a ski chalet, at least what I think of as a ski chalet, but nonetheless a house, a big house. And we stayed together there, 3 families, for 25 years. And we are still a big family, and we were able to strengthen our relationship while we were there. So I think that's all for now. I'll just want to tell you a little bit about the project itself. I committed to the project for the fall term of 2022. And my student and I got together, as we should have, at the beginning of the term. Unfortunately, I went away for 3 weeks, and it made it very difficult to continue on a regular basis to meet. Anyway, we managed to hook up a couple of times, thanks to the internet, and we started to get going. I had a hard time putting pen to paper on this project, and that was the major thing that the student did for me. I had committed to the term, and we just had to produce. And she kept reminding me of that and helped me organize the material into sizable chunks of information that I could then start to write about. That ended up being chapters to me in this book, and I will come back to that a little bit later. I then, after I wrote the text, I started thinking about photographs to go along with the text, and then I started collecting photographs over time from different players in the story, and was able to then place the photographs inside the text and end up with a book like this. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the table of contents. You may recall how I said that really helped me chunk the content, all the content I wanted to talk about, into reasonable chunks that I could then write about. So the prologue is really just background information on how we knew each other and how we developed as friends in the first place. Then we move to chapter 1, and that's all about our together home away from home. So that's more about how we found the house, bought the house, set up the house to get started. Chapter 2 is a big chunk of information. And really, I called it the first decade, the 16 of us. You may recall that we started with another couple who left us after the first decade, so I chunked it in that way. The first sub-chapter in that part is called Changes to Our Home Away from Home, and that's really how we modified, redecorated, renovated the house. Our winter weekend routine is obviously just what happened usually on Friday nights, on Saturdays, and Sundays before we left to go home. The third sub-chapter is called Ski Accidents and Injuries. Nothing major happened, but we certainly became friends with the ski patrol. 2.4 is expanding our social circle, and that was about all the people we met. All our friends from Canada who came down, our new friends from the States that we met, from Buffalo and Pennsylvania, and so on. And finally, a 2.5 is Ellicottville as an all-season resort. They were really making a conscious attempt to develop and to draw people in on all seasons of the year. Chapter 3 was what happened in the next 15 years after the one couple left, and there were just 12 of us by that point. And then we sold it. The epilogue is more or less what happened since then and how we've gone on to grow and develop as 3 different families and as one Ellicottville family. And finally, reflections, and those are just my personal thoughts and reflections of the entire experience. Thank you for listening, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye from sunny France.
Yes, thank you, Penny. Penny is online from France. And so we want to thank you very much for participating today at that long distance and also having done the video for us. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Henry.
Sometime in the fall of 2021, I was invited to participate in this marvelous project, but it wasn't until later when I got the videos from a previous memoir project that I got an idea of what this is all about. Well, it wasn't quite what I had in mind, but I was happy to collaborate. In September of last year, I was introduced to my tutor, an enthusiastic young student named Shayla Rodney. We started to work on the project, and with her help, I was able, by the end of the year, to write chapters, bringing me up to my life in 1969. But that was 53 years ago. I still had a lot of work to do, and Shayla was leaving me to go on with her own life. Well, I'll have to do the rest of my own. But I have to admit that now, 3 months later, not much more has happened. However, I've opened the doors of my past a little, and there is some hope that I will be able to keep adding to this personal history for whoever cares to read it. I know that this is supposed to be a celebration of the progress of aging, but as a professor, much of whose work has been in archaeology, aging is just seems to be a natural process that we can study and reflect on, hopefully learn from. Where did I get started on all this? And who were my partners in life to carry me to this point? I was the only child of parents who had immigrated to Chicago from Hungary. Sorry.
Sometimes it's difficult to find the button. Good for you.
From my earliest childhood, I was interested in science. Oh, the wrong one. Okay, right. Science. And I was encouraged by my father to pursue this, as he had wanted to be a scientist himself, but had to become a doctor instead. I also learned to play the violin and developed some artistic ability as well. All these interests have continued with me until my older years. I finally had to give up the violin a couple of years ago after having played in many different orchestras in the US and Canada, but I'm still drawing and painting. In science, I managed to get a PhD in geology from Caltech in 1960 and eventually became a professor at McMaster in 1962. Oh, no, I don't have the pictures the right way. Somewhere along the way, I met my beloved wife, Molly Ann, a native of Hamilton, and we started a very small family, one son named Josh. As a geologist, I was always on the move to many different areas to study the rocks. But around 1975, Molly Ann whispered in my ear, "Rocks are boring. Couldn't you find something more interesting to study?" It happened that I discovered some methods that would be of interest to archaeologists. I tried them out and I never looked back. I moved away from my home, but my parents were still in Chicago. My father, much older than my mother, passed away in 1969 while Molly Ann and I were spending a year in sabbatical in Italy. My mother continued to live in Chicago until 1985 when she turned 70. She found a nice apartment in Hamilton and soon had acquired a great bunch of friends. However, she passed away in 2004 at the age of 86. Being a professor allows you to get away from home base on sabbatical leave every 7 years. Starting in 1975, we spent a year in Israel and did that again twice more, falling in love with the country and its people and acquiring many friends. Meanwhile, our son was also getting to know Israel and to love it. In 1995, he moved here, and now we had another reason to want to come here regularly. My love of science has kept me thinking, researching, and writing papers. I'm still doing that, and just published one a couple of months ago. I'll be turning 90 in July if I'm lucky. There's no reason to stop doing research as long as I still have ideas and younger scientists are willing to help me test them. Sadly, Molly Ann passed away in September of 2020. Soon after, Josh encouraged me to move to Israel. This was already second home to me, so it was no great problem for me to move here. I live a 5-minute walk away from my boy and cook dinner for him every Friday night. We chat once or twice a day on the phone. Besides my friends here in Israel, I still have many dear friends in Canada with whom I keep in touch with regularly. That's my life.
Oh, thank you so much, Henry.
So up next, we have Robert.
There we go. Okay. Thank you, Isabella, and also thank you to Isabella for doing such a wonderful job of mentoring me. She did a great job and really helped me to get inspired to do some of this. I think my first hint that I would become a teacher was when I was a student in grade 7 at George L. Armstrong Public School in Hamilton. I wasn't drinking a glass of wine at the time, but that's what I look like now. I was asked, along with another student, to talk to the Parent Teacher Association. I think it was called the Home and School Association at the time, about what I wanted to be in my future. I went in with 2 possibilities: an Anglican minister or a teacher. And as you can see from my name on my photograph, sometime you'll see it's Canon Robert Morrow. Although I'm not an Anglican minister, I'm a lay canon in the Anglican Church, and I became a teacher. So I guess I got both of them. Oh, you can change here. This is a little shot from before I came to Canada. I think I was about 6 years old at the time, in my little kilt. Change. Okay. In high school, I was blessed with such wonderful teachers, some of whom are still friends, 68 years later. This is not an exhaustive list, but their names should be mentioned. On the right-hand side, Ken Stanley, geography, former Tiger Cat, by the way. Doesn't look as big in this picture, but he was 6'5", 245 pounds. In the middle, smaller, but a dynamo, Jim Forrester, geography. And both of these came with their wives to our wedding in 1964. Top line, Doug Gray, history. Wow. And he was across the hall from me in my first school as a teacher. Albert State, front row, English. He was also the director of our first play, Our Town by Thornton Wilder, where I met my future wife. I played George. She played my mother-in-law in the play. He was also a very fine gentleman. He grew up on Anticosti Island. A lot of people don't know where that is. It's in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. He was Jewish, but they couldn't afford a bar mitzvah for him at age 13. At age 91, 7 times 13, he had a bar mitzvah, and Lynn and I attended. Ken Warner, English, coming down from the top there. Look at the above list. Stanley, Forrester, Gray, State, Warner. Is there any wonder that my 3 subjects for teaching became geography, history, and English? And although they didn't influence my subject areas, there were others like Luke Leroy, physics, Steve Onishchuk, who's not in this photograph, but his name is at the bottom there, who was also a Tiger Cat, chemistry, Herbert Inman, biology, Rose Stokel and Morgan Kenny, French, George Monroe and Ed Mallard, basketball coaches, and Don Clark, phys ed. And not to leave him to the end, but a tremendous influence, Ernie Hutton, principal. I didn't always agree with him. He seemed to be more interested in having a good time in sport than winning. And he tried to convince us that this was a good thing. But I don't believe that was what he believed. I think he believed in winning. When Mr. Hutton passed, I was asked to speak at his celebration of life held at the school to speak for the students of Hill Park. Which, can you tear it up, clean it up? No, thank you. There we go. And this was probably the toughest 5-minute talk that I ever gave in my whole life. This was some of the students at Hill Park. And the next one. Somehow, Lynn and I ended up on exactly the same page in the school yearbook. And the next one. And this is a nice little note that Ernie wrote to me in a foreword of his autobiography. Okay, go up, Isabella. University was an interesting place to be in the 1960s. The going was tough for me. One could sense that the profs were mostly interested in those students who wanted to pursue a master's or a PhD. My parents wanted me to continue on, go to take a master's, go to law school, but I had other interests and sort of had my eyes set on teaching. When I was in my third year, well, you can go back one, Isabel, we're just going to stay there for a bit. When I was in my third year, I got a call to do a supply teaching day from Barton Secondary School. Ken Stanley, who was my geography teacher, was now the vice principal of Barton Secondary School. And he called me at 7 o'clock in the morning and said, could I be at Barton Secondary School at 8 a.m. to teach geography for that day? He said that my former geography teacher, Jim Forrester, would also be there. He was next door and he would help me. The school was on shifts. This was the morning shift from 8 o'clock until 12:45. So this worked out for me. I skipped a couple of classes, I guess. It was December the 11th, 1962. One day in that calendar year, I made $19. And on the way home, I got a $20 ticket for not stopping at a stop sign. Wasn't a very profitable day. I did a few more days teaching in 1963 and in 1964. And then came the big time. What to do after leaving university? I got interviewed for a job with a planning firm in Burlington. The head honcho taught us a mini unit on planning in year through in urban studies, and I liked him and his wonderfully creative style. After the interview, never heard a single word. So I decided to call my former principal, who is now a superintendent of secondary schools, Ernie Hutton, about the possibility of becoming a teacher. I had a meeting in March of 1964, and he offered me a job. I filled in an application form and indicated my first 3 choices of school within the city of Hamilton, all in the mountains since I didn't have a car. I asked what the odds were regarding getting one of these schools for September, and he said, quote, last year, 82% of the people got their first choice. Oh, great news. I had put down Barton Secondary School as my first choice, so I figured 82% got their first choice. I'm going to be going to Barton in the fall to start as a teacher. About a week later, however, I got a call from one of the deans at the university. She said she had me as accepting 2 jobs. Oops, one at Burlington Planning and one with the Hamilton Board of Education. I went to see her right away and indicated that I'd never heard back from Burlington Planning. So I went to the school board. I always wondered what would have happened had Norman Pearson, the head planner at Burlington Planning, called me after the interview. Maybe a completely different direction in my life. Anyway, that was March. June of 1964. Mr. Hutton called me to the board office for a meeting. He indicated he had a couple of options for me. I considered that to be pretty nice. First option, Barton Secondary School. Oh, my first choice. Teaching, geography, history, and physical education. I really didn't want to teach phys ed. Was not a good swimmer. Barton had a pool. Mr. Hutton could sense the lack of enthusiasm. He said, well, how about Westdale Secondary School with your former geography teacher, Ken Stanley, who's going to be the vice principal there next year, with full-time geography? Well, I said, there's no real choice. I prefer Westdale. He then repeated, so your first choice would be Westdale. I said, yes. So I watched as Mr. Hutton changed my first choice on my original application from Barton to Westdale and I became one of the many who statistically got his first choice. Ken Stanley picked me up every morning and drove me to Westdale. It was on his way to work. And then after we got married and moved, he went out of his way to pick me up and did this for 2 years. What a blessing. Any change now? And we'll go quickly through them. For 2 years, I was at Westdale. Then I got my accidental geography headship at Parkside High School. And for 4 years there. And then we went off to Kenya to teach for a couple of years. And you can change, Isabella. And working for the Canadian International Development Agency as a tutor at Kagumo Teacher Training College. And you can just fly through the rest of them. Thank you very much, Isabella.
Next, we have Gord, who's going to talk about the dirty 30s. And given some of the research I've done, I'm quite familiar with some of the narratives people have. So I'm interested in what you have to say, Gord.
Well, thank you. I was born in 1926, but my earliest memories are of Weyburn, Saskatchewan in the dirty 30s, when years of drought and overworking of the open prairie led to years of crop failure. Slide. Next slide, please. Weyburn was a major grain distribution center in southern Saskatchewan, where trains stopped twice a day near the huge grain elevators. It had a bank, a general store, several schools, 4 churches, and a Chinese restaurant. It had been the center of a robust farming community. Next. A decade of over-farming and drought had reduced the thin topsoil to dust. Often the winds blew and dust clouds blackened the sky. Rains seldom came. Wells went nearly dry. Water was scarce and used frugally for drinking, cooking, and washing. On Saturday night, some water was heated in a big copper tub on the stove for our weekly bath. Used water never went down the sink, but was carefully collected and used to water the garden. Next slide. I guess by today's standards, we were poor, but I didn't realize it at the time. My father's income as a minister was low, but there were always lots of food. Farmers with no money gave gifts of fresh farm produce. Our meals were plain but robust. Lots of oatmeal porridge, eggs, and peanut butter. On Sunday, we feasted on roast beef, potatoes, turnip, gravy, and pie. Next. We always had food left over for vagrant hobos who rode freight trains looking for work. They never left without asking if there were any chores that needed doing. After splitting some wood or doing a bit of hoeing in the garden, they left with sandwiches for later, smiles on their faces, and their heads held high. Next slide. Each fall, freight cars were really crowded with men trying to get a job helping with the harvest. That meant long days of hard work, but the pay was good. $1 whole a day with all they could eat at the thrashing table and a soft bed of hay to sleep on. Next. But both the freight cars and the charity went both ways. Several times a year, freight cars with bales of used clothing arrived from the east. Members of the church met at our house to sort, clean, and iron the clothing items and display them on racks on our glassed-in front porch. Next slide. People were proud. Mother would make tea and invite ladies in to share it. Each would arrive in her spotless Sunday dress, complete with hat, and gloves. After tea and lots of small talk, my mother would casually suggest that they might like to look over the clothes. Each would proudly decline, but finally reluctantly agree, and left with something new to wear to church. Next slide. I was extra lucky to spend several summers at my grandparents' farm, further north near Laverna. They had plowed up 500 acres of virgin prairie and for a few years had bumper crops. I have wonderful memories of helping my grandpa with haying and my grandma feeding her chickens. That's her in the picture with Pick, their horse, patiently letting 3 of us brothers ride at once. That's me, the little guy in the front. Sadly, by the mid-30s, crops had failed and they lost their farm for back taxes. The dirty 30s ended in 1939 with the onset of World War II. Soon, those hobos became fine soldiers, sailors, and airmen, or found work in factories that were soon open and humming again. I was so lucky to have had such a rich childhood. I had a loving family, and I learned that shared hardship can bring out the best in people. That charity is easier to give than to receive, and that happiness is found in giving, not getting. Thank you, and thanks especially to Alicia Saville, who was such a wonderful partner and collaborator, and certainly has improved my English along with giving me a few bits of her youthful energy. Thank you. That's the end.
Thank you, Gord. There was a book written about the Depression, and it was entitled, and it really reflects what you've said here. We didn't have much, but we sure had plenty. And that sharing and caring of peoples to get through tough times. So well expressed here. And next we have Owen.
Okay. Thank you. I guess you might be a little curious how I got involved in this memoir project, being that I'm from Cape Breton on the East Coast, but my sister Dorothy lives in Hamilton and worked at McMaster University for many, many years. So she kind of put me in touch, and we made contact then with Ellen. So my project, I'm kind of calling it my memoir, but it's my personal pandemic project. It's about my whole family. I'm now in my 70s. My wife and I, we have 12 grandchildren. Genealogy has been a long history, a long time hobby of mine. I love working on family history and on local history. I used to be a photographer many years ago for a long time, published a few books. I love telling stories, and my dad especially loved telling stories. I like putting that to paper, but I'm not saying I'm a good writer, but I want to record some of this. What kind of started this for me, this memoir project has really been going on for me for 50 years. I attended Ryerson Polytechnical School in the early 70s, studying photographic art. And I called my mom and asked her if she could send me some photographs, if she had any photographs of her side of the family, the Doyles. Sure enough, she collected all kinds of photographs together and put them in the mail to me to send them to me in Toronto, and they never arrived. So that was the start for me of this whole project that's gone on for 50 years, being very important to me. Then I jump ahead to 2019, and my dad was about to turn 100, and he lived with us. I decided to make use of social media. I love exploring with different kinds of publishing, I guess. And leading up to his 100th birthday, I thought every day for 100 days, I would make a post of a photo and a story on Dad's life. So Dad had lots of great stories to tell. He lived, he was alive for the great earthquake that struck Eastern Canada off Newfoundland. And he lived down by the harbor, Sydney Harbor, and witnessed the tidal wave coming in Sydney Harbor back in 1929. He spent 3.5 years overseas in World War II, and he lived through the Depression. So it's not so much my memoir, but I see this as all part of my history. So I'm generally calling it that. Unfortunately, Dad died just a few weeks short of his 100th birthday. And at that time, I thought it might be a good idea to try to put this together in a book. So then we jump ahead to early 2020, and we were hit with a global pandemic, this COVID-19. With this pandemic and the lockdown, everybody had a lot of time to fill. So this, for me, was the perfect opportunity for me to work on a family or a series of family history books. So today, it's amazing with the computer technology and the software that's out there, how relatively easy, once you collect and organize and whatnot, you can put it together in a book form and then email it off to one of these companies. I use Mac computers, and these books, each of them cost about $100, but they're hardbound books of very high quality. In about 2 weeks, you get a copy in the mail. So the first book that I did, you'll see it there on our Chesterfield on the top right, is of my dad, of the century in photos. And then I thought, well, my mom's family, the Doyles, she had lots of interesting stories and that. So I started putting together a book on my mom and dad, on their families, both. Then, of course, my wife's family, the McDonalds and McKinnons, have quite a history and have been in Cape Breton for 250 years, some 250 years. So I put together a book on them. Then I worked on a book on just my wife and I and our 4 children. So it's become this pandemic project. Who would ever have thought that this pandemic would last 3 years? Then I thought, and this is maybe more specific to, or more like a memoir, I guess. I taught for a period of time at the local community college, and they required that all students and instructors create a personal portfolio and keep it up to date. And I've kept it up to date since I taught there. So one of the books is on my career and what I've done as a photographer and what I've published. And I was president with the Chamber of Commerce, and I worked with 5 First Nation communities in economic development. So some of that history is there. I tend to put that away in a drawer, and my kids can dig it out when I'm gone. But all the other books, it's history of our family that is going to get lost. So so in the mid 2022, it was my sister that introduced me to the seniors project. And that's when I was put in touch with Jenna Wheeler. And Jenna is on here somewhere and one of the connected on Zoom. So Jenna was a great help to me in helping me kind of get focused and asking me questions and motivating me to keep doing this. So it's grown into quite a large project, and it's not finished yet. So I certainly appreciate what Jenna helped and contributed there for this project. I know not everybody, you can change some of these slides there too, whenever you want. They aren't in a particular order. That's my mom and dad's wedding going way back. That's on the cover of their book. So these books in this old history are certainly not going to be of interest to everybody, but even my kids sometimes, they don't show a whole lot of interest, but someone will. I know somebody will have the same bug as me, one of my grandchildren or cousins, whatever. And this is documented. If you think of the family attic, how in the past you would often put artifacts, photographs, old photographs, whatever, up in the attic. And I know when my mom and dad, when they finally passed away, and then when my wife's parents passed away and her mother lived with us for a number of years, it was a very emotional and very difficult ordeal to go through all their belongings. And unfortunately, a lot of things get thrown out. So I felt it awfully important to go through some of this and organize some of the stories, the photos, and put some order to it of what's important as far as the history of our family, so it's saved. Otherwise, you can just get totally overwhelmed. Often these old photos that may be in the attic, they don't have any names or dates on them, so you end up, they're of no value, so they end up getting thrown out. So my repository ends up being these books. Another reason why I felt it important to do these is with the technology today, with the iPhone. Everybody's got an iPhone. Even I take all my pictures now pretty well with an iPhone. But the danger is, instead of taking 2 pictures and then you have the cost of processing the film and getting it printed, there's none of that now. So everybody takes dozens and dozens of pictures of everything. So the good photos, the important photos, the historic photos, there's the fear they can get lost in amongst all the noise. So again, I thought I had the time through the pandemic to go through some of the old archives of pictures that I've collected, my own photographs, pictures of the grandchildren, of our children, whatever, and try to put some order to them. And that's why I organize them in different books. My wife's family, my mom and dad's family, on my wife and I, our kids. I did some on our travel, some travel we did. Made a trip to China, and so trying to document some of that. The other thing is technology. Technology changes very quickly, and we have to worry, or I worry, that in decades down the road, after I'm long gone, perhaps, the kids may try to open some of these files or photos or whatever, and the software has changed, and then we'll be able to open them. So again, I thought it was important, even though I'm laying this out on a computer, I wanted them printed as a hardcover book that somebody can have in their hands, and they don't have to worry about technology. Another nice thing about this is it's like a living project. I have it on the computer. I can do edits, deletions, additions to it at any time. And I can export a high definition digital file of it, a PDF file that almost anybody can open on any computer. They're fairly large files, but then I can share that with other cousins or other relatives, and there's no cost to that. They don't have to spend $100 to get a book printed. So there's a lot of different options, and some of the kinds of stories, I tend to sometimes talk too much, but just quickly, I'll throw on my dad's side. There's the story of the Lost Patrol. He had a great uncle, Francis Fitzgerald of the RCMP, the Lost Patrol up north in Dawson City. And CBC did a TV documentary on that. on my mother's side, her aunt was married to two U.S. generals, and one of them was killed in Midway, and he was the first U.S. general. She was married to a person that was an indigenous descent, General Tinker. So those kinds of stories to preserve, plus all Dad's stories from the war. I thought I have the opportunity before I get too old and age sort of steals these memories and stories from me, to organize this and make it more accessible and preserve it for my grandchildren. So thank you very much. Thank you to Jenna. Thank you for everybody that helped organize this. I think it's a great project to help people put these interesting stories, record their family history. I'm sure generations down the road will very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. It's nice to know that the pandemic did lend itself in some ways for good things. I'm
Yes.
quite sure your family's going to be really pleased down the road with all that you've done. Next, we have Carol talking about one of Oprah's favorite topics, and that is gratitude.
So as I said, Maya and I have chosen parts of my letter of gratitude to read to you today. Okay. When I was 4, we moved from Mexico to the Philippines, traveling via Switzerland after picking up my baby brother. My parents took me to a house that had lots of babies and told me I could pick one for my very own, which I did. He had curly blonde hair, large blue eyes, and a big, happy smile. Babies weren't brought by a stork or found in a mother's belly in my life. You just chose your own. At Easter time in Manila, I made a nest in my nipa hut for my baby ducks left for me by the Easter bunny. How lucky was I? Baby ducks and a baby brother. I wouldn't have these memories without being adopted in Mexico. My biological mother had the foresight to give me up for adoption so that I could have the amazing life that ensued. My parents were kind, generous, thoughtful, patient, and compassionate. They adored me and supported me through all my trials and tribulations. We often take for granted those things for which we should be thankful. As a young child, I took my life for granted, but as I grew up, I began to appreciate things around me. Through my travels, I realized that what we have is a life of privilege. We live in a peaceful country, free from persecution. We have a roof over our heads, food to eat, water to drink, and loving family members and friends. Pete, my partner, says we won the birth lottery. I agree, but I won it twice, once by adoption and then by being Canadian. For this, I am thankful. The discovery of my new family in North Dakota in 2020 was an exciting surprise. In no way did it take away from the love I feel for my parents and the incredible upbringing they gave me. This discovery enabled me to speak with members from my biological family and hear about my biological roots. For this, I am extremely thankful. I was welcomed with open arms. Meeting Aunt Francie and her family was a joy. Speaking to Hector, my half-brother who lives in North Pole, Alaska, was also intriguing. Again, how lucky am I? As I walk along the shore in Miramar Beach, I continue to think about my life. I feel enormous gratitude and appreciation. The sun is rising and the waves are rolling in. The dolphins accompany me, swimming parallel to my path. The color of the ocean changes from dark blue to turquoise and ends with the rolling white of the waves crashing onto the smooth alabaster sand of the shore. The smell of the sea, the feel of the breeze, the sound of the birds and the waves, the sight of the sandpipers scurrying along like little old ladies in high heels. Thank you, Alan. The touch of the warm sand on my feet and the tickle of the waves between my toes are constant reminders of how lucky I am and how much I have to be grateful for. Life is like a wave. It comes to shore and it's gone, but the water is still there. Time is like the ocean. You can't touch the same water twice because the wave that has passed will never pass again. Enjoy every minute. We need to appreciate the small moments and not rush through life. We must practice mindfulness, be curious, and be grateful for who we are. Be thankful. I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for the reminder that we should spend time counting our blessings. We have more than we probably really realize. Next, we have Mary Lou.
Oh, that's okay.
Anyway, I'd like to thank Maya Wilhelm for being my partner. She's certainly motivated me to go ahead. My project is still in work, but I have actually documented quite a bit. I'm reading, what I'm doing is some stories of my paternal ancestors. So meeting my maternal grandparents, Daisy and Ernest Biggs. It was February 1951. I would turn 5 in May and my brother Bruce would be 3 on December 2nd. I was excited. My nanny and Grandpa Biggs, Dad's parents, were coming on a big jet plane across the ocean from England for a visit. One night, while being prepared for bed, Mom said, "Lou, you know that not all people that God makes are perfect." "Oh, like little Annie," I said, spitting the toothpaste into the sink. Little Annie was an older friend of my grandparents. She was small in stature with a humpback and walked with a peculiar gait. "That's right, Lou. Well, when God was making Nanny Biggs, he ran out of parts, and she only has the upper part of her right arm. But Dad says she can do everything we can. Sometimes she wears a wooden arm. We don't want her to feel bad about it, do we?" Bruce and I sat on each side of Nanny in the back seat on our ride home from the airport. "Do you know about my missing arm?" Nanny asked. "Yes, we do, and we love you anyway," I said. With her heavy coat and gloved hand, her right arm looked normal, but when I touched it, it was hard and unyielding. She hated wearing her prosthesis and said she only wore it when she went out because people would stare at her and look uncomfortable. "I can do more things when I don't have it on. It hampers me," she said. I was intrigued watching her roll up her right sleeve and undo the strap to remove that wooden arm. She placed it in the back corner of the wardrobe. This is where it stayed for most of her visit. I worried it might come to life and chase after me, so I stayed away from their room. Her right arm ended just below her elbow joint. "The joint is helpful," she said. "I can tuck packages in the crook, and it was great for nesting my babies and grandbabies there. Of course, you guys are too grown up for that," she laughed. Her fingerless appendage flapped about when she helped Mom peel vegetables, set the table, wash and dry the dishes, and tie Bruce and my shoelaces. She even had managed to use diaper pins on her babies and grandkids. In the evening, she worked on her knitting and embroidery. Barbara Ann Scott had become Canada's sweetheart, winning the coveted gold medal in women's figure skating at the 1945 Olympics and was also a 2-time world champion. I had received a doll in her likeness for Christmas. It had ice skates and costumes and numerous other clothes that Mom had made to add to her wardrobe. Dad, at great expense, had secured front row seats at the ice capades, of which Barbara Ann Scott, now a professional skater, was the star performer. Bruce was too little to go. I felt very grown up attending my first performance. At the end of one of the acts, the male skater reached over the boards and handed Nanny a corsage. When the flowers wilted, she folded the dead blooms inside her Bible. At that time, Dad serviced and helped install food processing equipment, mostly for dairies. He was often away for long stretches because his territory extended into Quebec. During this day, my grandfather accompanied Dad on a working trip to Quebec City. The bright lights and opulence of Canada, plus the unique scenery, astounded Granddad. Dad said later that his dad had tears in his eyes. "Reg, you did the right thing coming to Canada. If I was younger, I would do the same thing." Britain was still in the post-recovery phase of the Second World War. Before they left, Mom invited her parents for a visit. Photos were expensive, but I have some of both sets of grandparents with my family taken by a neighbor, a priceless keepsake. That's it.
Oh, thank you, Mary Lou. I remember stories about Barbara Ann Scott as well, and the doll. Very nice. Very nice indeed. Jim, would you
Yes,
like to share?
yep. Before I begin, I didn't send the photos as a slideshow, so whoever is manning the photos, just put them up whenever you feel ready. I will say that over the years, I've inherited family albums, and one of the most treasured ones that I have is the ones my mother assembled during the 12 years that her and my dad were together. My dad passed very young. And when I go through these photos, it triggers memories of the people that are involved. So I don't feel like I should just write down the names under the photos. I'm trying to write down some stories that these photos bring to mind. So with that with that spirit in mind, I guess the best way to start this story will be at the beginning. So that's where I'm starting. Now, before I go any further, I want to remind everyone that for some strange reason, I happen to have been very young on the day I was born. And a lot of years have passed since that day, so my memory may be a little vague as to the actual sequence of events that occurred. Because it was quite a while ago, try as I might, I just can't find anyone else who was there at the time who might help me reconstruct the events of the day. The facts are, I was there, and there's no one else left who was there, so you'll have to trust that my version of the events is historically accurate. Now that I've established these ground rules, let's start my story at the beginning with the facts as I recall them. It's a late October morning in Wapaka, a small town in central Wisconsin. It is a crisp, sunny fall day, and while the temperature is not yet at what will be its mid-50s high, it is getting very close. I said earlier that time is several decades ago. Now let's zero in on just how long ago it was. The day that I was born was in the mid-20th century, and the Second World War had recently ended, which was good. However, the Cold War had started, and that was bad. And the baby boomer generation was about to get another participant. That would be me. It was that time on a Sunday morning when the church bells were ringing to signify the end of church services, and the fire station was about to blow its siren, alerting everyone that it was now noon and time for lunch. Yep, that's when I entered the world. The doctor slapped my behind, and I let out my first cry of "feed me," just in time for the noon whistle. The sequence of events had pretty much followed me throughout my life, in that often I'd been late for the church services and early for the potluck that would follow the service. Now, as an aside, I will notice that the church potlucks no longer occur with the frequency they did back then, and I, for one, do feel their loss. I also believe that church potlucks and weekly family get-togethers are why I can best be described as a full-grown, well-fed Wisconsinite. As a result of the events on this particular day, I did develop a lifelong distrust of doctors and hospitals. I mean, outside of keeping the doctor from his church potluck, I hadn't done anything to deserve such a violent and humiliating welcome to the world as the slap on the butt that I received. Yet such an event occurred, and predictably, it has caused me to be very cautious around doctors and hospitals ever since. You may be curious what I remember about my first residence. Well, as I recall, the hospital was a 3-story building that looked more like a boarding house or hotel than a hospital. It was located near a mill pond fed by a stream, which created a peaceful scene that would be appropriate for a Currier and Ives painting. The hospital's maternity room was on the 3rd floor, where I was the guest of honor, and my dad had waited patiently outside the delivery room for my arrival. At the time of my arrival, my mother and he had been married for a little more than a year. A very busy year that had seen them marry, honeymoon to Niagara Falls, and taken ownership of the dairy farm about 10 miles from town. This farm is where I and a brother who would be born 3 years later would manage to get into a fair amount of mischief. During my 3-day stay, grandparents, parents, aunts, and uncles would come by and welcome me to the world. I was only the 3rd of my generation on the paternal side and the 1st of my generation on the maternal side, so I was a pretty big deal. That's right. I was to be one of the oldest of what would be over 20 grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and cousins, which was my parents' and my aunts and uncles' contributions to the baby boom. Quite the honor, wouldn't you say? That amount of responsibility just about overwhelmed me. However, I did accept this leadership challenge and grew into it, coming up with plenty of adventures and challenges for my cousins and siblings at various family get-togethers. And of course, those adventures would often include my famous cousin, not me. Now that the statute of limitations has expired, I have decided it is safe to share these adventures with you. That's about all I've got.
Thank you, Jim. A great first day for sure. Our next participant is Sue, and she's going to round out our presentations for today. Sue?
Sorry about that. I so enjoyed this whole process, and that surprised me a little bit, but I thank everyone who participated, in particular, Ellen, thank you for inviting me, and my student partner, Allison Hansen, for asking all the right questions and helping me to remember the good times. This is a photo of my family in 1960. That's my 5-year-old self in the front. I'm number 6 in a family of 8 children, the youngest of the 4 daughters. Ours was a blue-collar family, much like many of our surrounding neighbors. My dad built our house on a 1-acre lot in a small village in rural Essex County. As was his custom, most of the building supplies were bartered for or salvaged. In the beginning, our well water came into the house via a pump mounted on the kitchen counter, right over a large enamel sink. Cold water only. For several years, our toilet was a small building in the backyard. We heated water on the stove for a weekly bath, and for the laundry, we used a wringer washer and an outdoor drying line. The wood-burning furnace was a big box set in the middle of the main floor. A large picture window in the kitchen was set to look out over our yard and the train tracks that passed alongside our property. A slow-moving train passed by twice daily, running between the granary and the Heinz factory in Leamington. We enjoyed a comfortable familiarity with the men who ran the train. They'd gather in the window of the engine to wave at the neighborhood kids as they rode slowly by. I was quite young, maybe around 9 or 10, when an old treadle sewing machine appeared at our house. Sister Burl threaded that old sewing machine for me again and again. I started out sewing fabric scraps together. I was a poor rural kid with no resources, so I learned early on how to make things from other things. I continued to explore and learn on my own until high school, when home ec classes were offered. I bought my first new sewing machine in 1973, a beautiful, shiny new Singer. Sewing has been my hobby, my livelihood, and my meditation for many years. I've explored different techniques, including garment construction, curtains, blinds, upholstery. I wanted to sew everything, and I still do. In 1999, I accepted a job in the local quilt shop. Before long, I was designing my own patterns and teaching quilting classes and loving every minute of it. Quilting still holds my attention, and my latest interest is sustainable quilting. And with that in mind, I'm crafting a memory quilt for myself, using repurposed fabrics and adding in personal mementos. I'm caught up in the memories of what I'm stitching and why. Those small lap quilts are traditionally made for people living with dementia. Is there another picture? Is there a picture of my quilt? There it is, thank you. So these small lap quilts are traditionally made for people living with dementia. While I hope that I'll never need it for that, it makes me happy to prepare it in a way that's meaningful to me. This is how it looks so far. This is what I call a slow sew. I get caught up in the memories, and I'm spending more time considering the construction and embellishments, rearranging some of the things I'll be adding to it. Every item has a memory and a story to tell. The bottom left shows the stitching style I'm planning to use when I get to that part. It's a project I can continue to add my memories to, and I'm not planning to need it anytime soon. That's it, thanks.
Well, thank you, Sue. What a nice way to put your life together with stitches and have those memories always there with you. That brings our presentations to an end. And I just want to thank you, Ellen, for your heroic work in bringing students and seniors together. What my students realize is that there is no generation gap, and that certainly the seniors have a lot to share, and they really appreciate it. I want to thank Isabella again for her help, and Stephanie, I saw her here a moment ago. She's Ellen's right-hand woman. And thank you to all you participants that took the time to come and share the writings that you've done with us today. The stories are all so very heartwarming and so meaningful to all of us. And I wish all of the students could be here. Thank God that we record this and then we can watch it, and they certainly can share in it. I want to also note that the students who participate in this really do glean an awful lot. And as Gord, you said, you might feel a lot younger because of the participation and the interaction with someone young. You give them courage, and what they find in many of you is resilience, that you've endured through many things which they face today in other ways, and you give them the faith and the courage to take those bold steps forward. So little do you know what you really share with them. You give an awful lot. And one thing I'd like to remind you is that as you're writing these memoirs and they go on, sometimes my students think they have to finish your entire memoir in 13 weeks. And I tell them, no, you're just doing a part of it. So you're all welcome to come back in the fall and the winter, whatever you choose, and to have another student and to continue on with them. We encourage you to do so. You've got to be the savviest generation that we know, because you really work the computers well, and they are amazed at how well you really know your way around computers. So I really appreciate you taking the time to work with our students as well. You give them so much. I don't know if we have any time, Ellen, for any comments or questions. If anyone cares to send an email, let me know how we might do better in the class with this project. I would be so grateful. Ellen?
Well, I think what we could do is close the recording and then have an opportunity for questions or comments, maybe from the students on their experience. I do want to thank you, Geraldine, so much for partnering with us, and to honor all of the seniors and students who've taken part. We've now had 80 pairs of students and seniors over 3 years. So I think that's just a great testament to Hamilton and our outreach to reducing the generation gaps, to promoting intergenerational communication for the